Welcome to WGRZ Plus. I'm Dave McKinley. The recent sentencing of Peter Gerace on charges he was convicted of surrounding his former Pharaoh's Gentlemen's Club marked the end of another chapter in one of the longest and most publicized federal prosecutions in the recent history of Western New York. It involved allegations of sex, drugs, strippers, motorcycle gangs, references to the mafia, corrupt cops, and invoked the names of local celebrities, sports stars, and politicians caught in the web of what prosecutors allege was the underbelly of the sex trade, but what defense lawyers insisted was activity, while offensive to the sensibilities of many in society, was practically no different than what one might find in any strip club. Almost 7 years after federal agents conducted a raid at his Gentlemen's Club, which eventually led to charges against Gerace and former DEA agent Joseph Bongiovanni, who was tried separately and convicted of using his position to protect drug dealers and then sentenced to serve 5 years in federal prison, Gerace finally learned his fate on May 13th. It would be 25 years in prison for the former Pharaoh's strip club owner, who was convicted after a lengthy trial in late 2024, where he was found guilty on 8 of the 9 counts he faced, including drug trafficking, sex trafficking, witness tampering, operating the club as a drug-involved premises, and bribery. In a strange twist, Bongiovanni had been acquitted of accepting bribes from Gerace, but Gerace was convicted of bribing Bongiovanni. Gerace contacted us just hours after he was sentenced, from where he's currently housed at the Cattaraugus County Jail. When you heard the sentence, I mean, what went through your heart? It's 25 years.
Well, the lawyers told me not to worry, because whether it's 8 years or 20 years or life, that's all too long. So what they're saying is, we're looking for the appeal. The judge has a job to do, and I understand that, and he did his job. And I know that he has sentencing guidelines that he has to go by.
U.S. District Court Judge Lawrence Villardo actually departed downward from federal sentencing guidelines, which suggested Gerace should spend between 27 and 33 years in prison, saying he found the guidelines to be too high and that the sentence should be sufficient, but not greater than necessary. While the sentence handed down was 25 years, Gerace will get credit for the nearly 3 years that he's already been in custody and is eligible to earn up to 57 days per year in good time while in prison. This means that barring any successful appeal or early release, Gerace could be out in 20 years when he's around 79 years of age.
It's still a life sentence.
Villardo also spared Gerace from the recommended fine of between $500,000 and $2 million, as suggested by the guidelines, saying he didn't believe Gerace, who sold his business and his home and has been left penniless after mounting his legal defense, had the resources to pay it anyway. Gerace's mother, Linda, seemed on the verge of collapse after the sentence was pronounced and declined comment as she was assisted by family members in leaving the courthouse. His father, Peter Gerace Sr., did speak to us briefly.
The only thing I could say, I think the judge was fair, and we'll see what comes, with the appeal and that.
But at their ages, they know that if that appeal is unsuccessful, they will not live long enough to see their son as a free man ever again.
She's upset. Yeah. She's real upset, It's her son.
Yeah.
You know how mothers are.
Gerace is also due to go on trial in June in a separate witness tampering case where he's accused with 5 other men as being part of a conspiracy to kill a witness against him. Former Pharaoh's dancer Crystal Quinn, found dead in a Wellsville apartment several months before Gerace stood trial from an overdose, which prosecutors allege was administered purposely but staged to make it look accidental. Conviction there could bring additional time behind bars. In court, Assistant U.S. Attorney Joseph Trippi continued to describe Gerace as a predator who took advantage of drug-addicted dancers at Pharaoh's by coercing them into sex acts with himself, customers, and friends as they sought to feed their addictions. Trippi read a victim impact statement from one of those who testified against Gerace, in which she described her drug addiction as like being a chain around her neck. In the letter, the woman insisted, Peter Gerace knew exactly what he was doing and pushed us into unspeakable acts and treated us as merely products to be sold. Trippi then told the judge, The defendant made choices over and over to victimize society's most vulnerable for his sexual satisfaction and that of others, while noting Gerace's previous conviction in connection with a telemarketing scam in the late 1990s, which Trippi said targeted elderly persons. He jumped from victimizing one vulnerable group to another. Frankly, there are very few additional federal crimes he could commit that he already hasn't. In asking for leniency for his client, Gerace's lawyer Eric Sainline noted that many of those who claimed to be victimized by Gerace in the manner prosecutors described were themselves engaged in prostitution outside the club. He also noted that several of those witnesses were either being paid by the government in exchange for their testimony or given leniency for their own criminal charges. Sainline told Judge Villardo that despite that, it was at Gerace's direction that he and co-counsel Mark Foti treat those witnesses with as much respect and compassion as they could. He did not want us to slut-shame these women, Sainline said. He wanted them treated with respect and dignity. We never said he was an angel, but he's not a monster. He's a loving father and loyal son. Sainline also noted again for the record how several people who appeared on a list of potential defense witnesses prior to Gerace's trial found themselves charged with federal crimes. These included Amherst Police Detective Greg Trotter, who was charged with lying to FBI agents, but after a jury at his trial couldn't reach a verdict, agreed to plead guilty to a misdemeanor count of impeding or interfering with a federal officer. Sainline inferred that the actions taken by prosecutors dissuaded other potential witnesses from coming forward to testify on Gerace's behalf. There's never been a prosecution like this conducted with such zeal and with so many resources, is what Sainline told the judge.
Any lawyer will tell you they've never seen a case like this. A case where you just put somebody in jail because you threatened a woman with 15 years. A case where you took away 4 of his witnesses right before trial. And then admitted right at Greg Trotter's trial that, yeah, that's why he got arrested for being my witness. Those are all huge issues.
And all of these issues are expected to be part of the appeal that Gerace plans to file, as well as what Sainline reiterated on sentencing day, that the government throughout the 7-year history of the case acted to disqualify several previous attorneys defending Gerace, thus impacting his right to effective counsel.
Nothing ever happens to these prosecutors. They are allowed to do whatever they want. It's a free-for-all. It shouldn't be that way because you can't get a fair trial. Dave, you can't get a fair trial. It's impossible. It's impossible.
In court, when given the chance to speak, Gerace said that for those who felt his actions caused them significant harm, he was deeply sorry. But afterward, he was not so contrite.
That's what my lawyer and I sat down and we talked about, I had a choice of not saying anything or saying that, but I said, at no point am I going to say I'm guilty of anything because I'm not. So he felt as though that wasn't saying anything about guilty, but you're showing some remorse. Charles was never a drug premises, ever. These girls that are saying that they slept with me, they didn't even sleep with me. I was giving them drugs and holding sex over their heads. It didn't happen. It didn't happen.
To this day, Gerace staunchly maintains that he is not guilty of the crimes for which he was charged, for which he was found guilty by a jury, and for which he has now been sentenced.
I've said this from the beginning, Dave. I'm innocent. I don't belong in jail.
But prosecutors tell a far different story. More about that part of the story and some last-minute surprises coming up. Welcome back to our extended look back at the recent sentencing of former Pharaoh's Gentlemen's Club owner Peter Gerace, who nearly 7 years after being charged and a year and a half after being convicted of drug trafficking, sex trafficking, and bribery, and using his business as a drug-involved premises, received a 25-year prison sentence on May 13th. Customarily, the U.S. Attorney's Office holds a news conference following verdicts and/or sentencings in high-profile cases. However, that was not the case when it came to this one. And according to an assistant U.S. Marshal on that day, the prosecution team asked to be let out a side door after the sentencing in order to avoid the press. They did their talking in court and through the final paperwork they filed prior to sentencing, in which they pushed for a life sentence. It is 81 pages long and describes Gerace as a prior federally convicted felon who engaged in substantial and continuous criminal conduct with a history of deceit and lies, a resourceful criminal who is determined to commit crimes and is unwilling to follow the laws, who spews regurgitated lists of meritless grievances previously rejected by every judge to have considered them, and one with a violent past, attaching a police report from 2013 where Gerace was charged with beating one of his ex-wives, which is something that did not come out at trial. The defense also dropped a bombshell in its final submission before sentencing, a revelation that Gerace had been molested as a child, impacting his mental health, which eventually led to depression and drug use. And that when revealing this to his lawyers, Gerace broke down in tears. Gerace described his abuser as an older female relative.
You know, when you're a child, it's not something you ever want to bring out, and it only came out with psychiatrists in the past and a few friends, and that was it. Embarrassing and humiliating.
Lead prosecutor Joe Trippi dismissed the revelation as unsubstantiated and a desperate attempt by Gerace to gain sympathy. Only when he's facing sentencing does he conjure up these claims, Trippi told the judge, adding, nothing is mitigated by these claims.
It's not conjured up, Dave. It happened. It's expected from Joe Trippi. Joe Trippi has lied so much in these cases, it's expected. I watched this man lie for over 5 years about me. I watch him lie to judges right to their face, and nothing happens. Nothing happens. I don't understand it.
As in any trial, the judge gets the final word, and you'll hear what the judge in this case had to say right after this. Welcome back. Faro's Gentlemen's Club owner Peter Gerace, who nearly 7 years after being charged and a year and a half after being convicted of drug trafficking, sex trafficking, bribery, and using his business as a drug-involved premises, received a 25-year prison sentence on May 13th from federal judge Lawrence Villardo. It was the conclusion of the latest chapter in a legal saga dating back nearly 7 years. As in any trial, the judge gets the final word, and in this one, Judge Villardo, who said the testimony given by women at the trial was difficult for him to hear, told Gerace, these are serious crimes. You took advantage of women who were vulnerable in their need for drugs, and while your attorney is correct in saying it was their choice to use them, it doesn't change the fact that you took advantage of them. Villardo further said there were not just one or two, but a parade of witnesses who the jury found credible and who I did too. Because you know so many people and because of your position, you thought you could get away with it, and that made things worse for you.
What bothers me is even the judge looked at me like I'm such a bad person and he listened to these girls. These girls got paid to say what they did. Most people that know me, Dave, in Western New York, know that I'm a good person. I've always taken care of my employees, always. I'm not a bad man. I'm not a bad person. This is sick stuff that was made up by just a few people, but they got paid good money. I want my story told. You know, Dave, I'm really hoping that at some point somebody in the U.S. Attorney's Office wakes up and says this isn't right. I'm hoping that somebody up in Washington sees this. I'm hoping that somebody with the Office of Professional Responsibility sees this, because this is not right. This is wrong. Like I said, they want to hold me accountable for drug use over the years, that's fine. But don't hold me accountable for these things that are not true. It's not fair.
Gerace's appeal may be heard in about a year. In the meantime, he faces another trial where, along with 5 other men, he is charged in an alleged conspiracy to kill a witness who was expected to testify against him at his drug and sex trafficking trial. I'm Dave McKinley. Thanks for joining us on WGRZ+.